My name is Evan Merrick, and 3 weeks ago, I bought a house in southern Vermont. It sits on a thin county road that winds through ash and maple woods, about 15 minutes outside a town called Westfield. The realtor called it a heritage property, which is a polite way of saying it's old enough that nobody remembers who built it first. The frame leans a little, the floors creak no matter how still you stand, and the nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile down the slope. For someone who spent most of his 30s packed into apartments and office cubicles, it felt like space to breathe. I closed on the house on a Friday and drove up with the last of my boxes that Sunday. The air was thin, clean, and sweet with late summer grass. By evening, I'd unpacked enough to make the place feel lived in. Coffee maker, lamp, old chair by the window. That's when I noticed how quiet it got after sundown. The woods seemed to swallow the wind itself. I remember thinking it was almost too quiet, like the silence was a held breath. The note didn't show up until the next morning. I was pulling out the lower drawers in the built-in cabinet beside the fireplace, looking for the gas shut-off valve. The bottom panel came loose, and behind it was a narrow space lined with splintered boards. Something pale was wedged there, folded flat and bound with twine. When I unwrapped it, I realized it wasn't a letter exactly. It was a sheet from an old yellow legal pad, creased and softened by time. Across the top, in shaky block letters, someone had written, RALSFARTHOIGNR below it, a numbered list in ballpoint ink that had faded to rust brown. One after sunset, keep all mirrors covered. Do not open the door if someone knocks after 1100 p.m. 3. If you hear your name from the woods, stay inside. 4. At dawn, check the window locks. They may not stay latched. Never sleep in the upstairs bedroom facing north. No signature, no explanation. I laughed at first. Maybe a prank left by the previous owners. The house had been empty for over a year, and before that, owned by an elderly woman named Elsie Palmer, according to the deed. She died without family, which is how the property landed with the bank. I figured the list might have been hers, a superstition, maybe, scribbled during the last stretch of her life. Still, there was something about the phrasing. They may not stay latched. Like she wasn't talking about the locks themselves. I folded the note and stuck it in my pocket. By afternoon, I'd nearly forgotten about it. The day passed in a blur of chores, changing bulbs, hauling junk from the attic, checking the breaker box. The sky started dimming around 7, the kind of slow violet dusk that stretches long in late August. I was sitting on the porch steps, drinking from a chipped mug, when the first thing felt off. From the tree line across the yard, maybe 50 yards out, came a faint sound. A man's voice. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence. Low, rhythmic, as if he were speaking quietly to someone else. I stood and listened. The voice faded, then started again closer. I told myself it was just a neighbor out walking, or maybe a hunter cutting through early. But the nearest property line was over the ridge, and the voice didn't move the way footsteps would. It circled. I went inside and locked the door. That night, I couldn't shake the thought of the list. If you hear your name from the woods, stay inside. It didn't say what would happen if you didn't. Around 10:30, I checked the windows. 3 in the living room, 1 in the kitchen, 2 in the hall, all latched. The north bedroom upstairs was still full of boxes, so I set up my cot in the small guest room facing east. My phone had almost no service, so I downloaded a few podcasts to fall asleep to. By 11, the house had gone still again, so still I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock above the mantel. Then the knocking started, 3 soft raps. Not on the front door. The sound came from the side entrance, the one off the mudroom near the kitchen. I froze. My first thought was, delivery, neighbor, wrong address. but the clock read 11:14. Nobody knocks that late in a rural town unless something's wrong. I waited. Another set of knocks. A little harder this time. I thought of the note's second rule. The rational part of me wanted to open the door, check, end the suspense. The rest of me couldn't move. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the door's window pane, half expecting to see a face appear. But the glass stayed dark, reflecting only the dim kitchen light. The knocking stopped. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. The woods outside pressed in like a tide. Finally, I went to the window by the sink, lifted the curtain edge, and peered out. The yard was empty. No car, no flashlight beam, nothing but the gravel drive and the faint silver wash of moonlight. I went back to bed around midnight, still half listening for another sound. Sleep came shallow and restless. At some point, maybe an hour later, I woke to the sound of footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate, creaking across the boards of the north bedroom. That room had no furniture yet. I hadn't even opened the shutters. The sound moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, paused, then crossed back. I sat up and held my breath. The house seemed to tilt around the noise, every creak magnified in the dark. I thought of raccoons, maybe a squirrel nest, but the weight of it was wrong. Too heavy. I climbed quietly out of bed and grabbed the flashlight from the dresser. The steps had stopped. I stood in the hallway listening. Only the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the faint pulse of my heartbeat. The staircase groaned under my weight as I went up. At the landing, the air felt colder. I clicked on the light. The door to the north bedroom was closed. I'd left it open that morning. When I touched the handle, it was cold enough to sting. I turned it slowly and pushed. The room was empty. Dusty floorboards, a single window facing the trees. The flashlight beam skimmed the corners. No movement, no animals, no sign of anything disturbed. Except the window latch. It was open. A chill ran up my arms. The window itself was still shut, but the brass latch hung loose, lifted halfway as if by a careful hand. I closed it and pressed down until it clicked. Then, without knowing why, I whispered into the dark, "Stay closed." I barely slept after that. When morning finally bled through the curtains, pale and cold, the house felt less menacing, more absurd. Maybe the latch had just slipped. Maybe I'd forgotten to tighten it after cleaning. The mind fills silence with stories, that's all. Still, when I went downstairs for coffee, the note was sitting on the kitchen counter where I hadn't left it, folded neatly. Someone, or something, had moved it from my jacket pocket. I checked the door locks again. All secured. Windows too. No footprints in the dew outside. Nothing disturbed except my own sense of order. By noon, I convinced myself I'd misplaced it the night before. Stress. Exhaustion. The house playing tricks on me. I tucked the paper into a drawer under the silverware and told myself to stop feeding the thought. But around sunset, when the light turned that strange honey color and the shadows began to stretch long across the yard, I noticed something through the window. Up near the tree line, where the slope rose into the woods, a strip of fabric fluttered from a branch. White or beige, hard to tell in the fading light. I fetched the binoculars from the truck. It wasn't fabric. It was paper, torn and caught in the bark, flapping gently. And the way it bent in the breeze, it looked exactly like the same kind of legal pad paper the rules were written on. I stood at the window for a long minute, just watching that flutter of pale paper catch and release the dying light. The air had gone still enough that every sway looked deliberate. I told myself it was probably trash. A grocery receipt, a wrapper, something blown in from the road. But the way it moved didn't look random. It pulsed, almost, like something breathing under it. I slipped on my boots and grabbed the flashlight, even though the sun hadn't fully set. The beam gave me a little courage. The grass out back had grown high, brushing my jeans as I crossed the yard. The smell of damp earth rose with each step, sharp and mineral. I could hear the slow chirr of crickets, but nothing else. No wind, no birds. The world felt paused. By the time I reached the tree line, dusk had deepened into that soft in-between gray where color drains out of everything. The paper was maybe 8 feet up, snagged on a rough patch of bark. I reached up and worked it loose. Same yellow legal pad, same blocky handwriting, but it wasn't the same note. Across the top, under the faint crease from folding, someone had written "Wow Broka Ararle." No signature. Just those 4 words. My throat went dry. I turned the sheet over, but the back was blank. When I lowered it, the woods ahead of me looked thicker. Darker somehow, as if the trees had leaned closer while I wasn't watching. I started back toward the house fast enough that the flashlight bounced in my grip. Inside, I locked the door and checked the first note in the drawer. Still there. I unfolded it to be sure. The list of rules stared back, calm and precise, untouched. I laid the new paper beside it. The handwriting matched perfectly. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe the realtor. Or one of the maintenance guys who'd fixed the gutters last week. But how would they have known about the first note? I hadn't told anyone. I brewed another pot of coffee just to have something normal to do. As the machine hissed, I caught a faint sound from upstairs. A short, dragging creak, like furniture being shifted an inch. I froze listening. Nothing. I told myself the old beams were settling with the night air. But I couldn't shake the sense that the sound had come from that north bedroom again. I went up. The air felt heavier with each step, colder too, though the windows were shut. My breath caught when I saw the bedroom door open again. Inside, the air smelled faintly of metal, like rust or wet coins. The window latch was unhooked again, but the pane was closed tight. A single handprint smudged the glass from the inside, clear as day. Too big to be mine. I didn't touch it. Instead, I backed out, shut the door, and dragged a chair from the hall to wedge under the handle. My pulse was hammering hard enough I could hear it. I went back downstairs and sat on the couch, facing the staircase like I was standing guard over my own home. The clock struck 10, each chime stretching longer than it should. I told myself I'd stay awake until morning. By 10:30, the caffeine couldn't keep my eyes open. I must have dozed, because the next thing I knew, the house had gone very still again, and the sound came from the side entrance. 3 knocks. Same rhythm as before. I checked the clock. 1100 p.m. exactly. I whispered to no one. Don't answer. The knocking came again, this time slower, spaced out, deliberate. Each thud seemed to pull the air out of the room. Then a voice. Even. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but close. Too close. It came from the other side of the door. My body went rigid. I hadn't told anyone I'd moved in yet. Not even my coworkers. Open the door. A woman's voice this time. Calm, familiar in a way I couldn't place, like hearing an old recording of yourself. I turned off the lamp. The voice came again. Softer. You broke a rule. The flashlight was in my lap, but I didn't turn it on. I sat there, every muscle locked, staring at that narrow band of light under the door. Then something moved across it. A shadow, slow and deliberate. It lingered there for a full second before withdrawing. The silence afterward was worse than the voice. When I finally dared to move, I crawled to the front door and checked the lock, still bolted, the side door. I couldn't bring myself to look directly. I just listened. Nothing. The rest of the night stretched on without another sound. When dawn finally bled in, the light looked wrong. Pale, hazy, filtered through mist. I got up and checked every window. The latches were all secure, except the kitchen's. That one was cracked open an inch. The latch still down, but not engaged. I stared at it a long time before sliding it shut. After breakfast, I walked the property line just to prove there was nothing out there. The dew was thick, but no footprints, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been near the house. By late morning, I convinced myself I was dealing with a prank. Someone could have left the second note overnight. Maybe a squatter still had keys. I decided to check the attic, see if anyone had been staying there. The pulled-down ladder creaked as I climbed. Dust hung in the beam of my flashlight like suspended ash. The attic ran the full length of the house. Bare beams, a few old trunks, and piles of brittle newspapers. Nothing else. But near the far end, where the rafters dipped low, something glinted, a small mirror. The glass was cloudy, the frame carved with simple floral patterns. It leaned against the wall, half covered by a moth-eaten blanket. I started to move it aside, then remembered the first rule. After sunset, keep all mirrors covered. It wasn't sunset yet, but my pulse spiked anyway. I backed away, left it where it was, and climbed down. By noon, I decided to call the local sheriff's office. I rehearsed what I'd say, that someone might have been trespassing, that I'd found notes left on my property. But when I reached for my phone, it was dead. Not low battery dead, completely blank. Wouldn't power on. I tried the wall outlet with a lamp to test. The lamp worked fine, just the phone dead. I drove into town to charge it at a diner. The moment I hit the first turn on the county road, I felt lighter. The woods thinned, the air cleared. It's strange how quickly fear evaporates when there are people around again. I sat by the window, watching trucks pass on the highway, and almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. When my phone came back to life, I checked the call log. No missed calls, no messages. The time read 2:11 p.m. Before heading back, I stopped at the library to dig through old property records. The librarian, a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes, looked up when I gave the address. "Oh," she said, "the Palmer House." "Yeah," I said. "Bought it a few weeks ago." Her expression tightened. That place should have stayed empty. I hesitated. "You knew Elsie Palmer?" She nodded slowly. I did. Quiet woman. Hard life. What kind of hard life? She kept to herself after her husband went missing. That would have been, 20 years ago now. Missing. The librarian's hands paused on the keyboard. Walked into those woods one evening and never came out. Search team found his flashlight halfway up the ridge. Nothing else. I felt the air thicken in my chest. Did they ever find him? She shook her head. Elsie stayed another decade after that. Said he still knocked sometimes. I didn't ask what she meant. Back home, the light was fading again. I parked at the edge of the drive and just sat in the car for a while, watching the house through the windshield. The windows looked darker than they should, like eyes adjusting before I did. When I finally went inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not dust this time. Damp wood, faintly metallic. The same smell as the north bedroom. Then the sound, a single knock from upstairs. I gripped the banister, staring up at the landing. Another knock, closer, and then, from the top of the stairs, a voice, low and steady. "Cover the mirror." For a long time I didn't move. The house seemed to lean toward that voice, as if it too were listening for what I'd do next. My flashlight sat on the table behind me. I reached for it without looking away from the stairs. The beam quivered in my hand, a thin stripe of light against the wallpaper. "Cover the mirror," the voice repeated, quieter this time, almost coaxing. It wasn't quite a whisper, not quite normal speech. Somewhere in between. The way a thought sounds when it's almost yours. I forced myself to step forward. Each tread on the staircase answered with a low groan. The smell of rust grew stronger. When I reached the landing, the air felt thicker, like standing in a closed room after someone's been crying. The voice didn't come again. Only silence. I glanced toward the north bedroom. The door stood open now. The chair I'd wedged under the handle lay tipped on its side, legs snapped clean. Inside, pale light filtered through the curtain seams. The handprint on the window was gone. In its place, drawn into the dust on the pane, were 5 words written with a fingertip: COVRTHEMARORB for dark. The letters were fresh enough that a few motes still floated where the dust had shifted. I backed out slowly, shutting the door with my foot, then turned toward the attic pull-down ladder. If the voice wanted the mirror covered, fine. I'd cover it. Anything to make the house quiet again. The string for the ladder hung motionless, even though the air around it stirred with faint drafts. I pulled it down, climbed halfway up, and froze. The attic above wasn't dark anymore. It glowed faintly, like moonlight filtered through fog. When my head cleared the hatch, I saw why. The mirror. It was no longer leaning against the wall. It stood upright, propped somehow in the middle of the floor. The blanket that had been over it was gone. The surface caught my flashlight beam and scattered it, throwing pale ripples across the rafters. For a moment, the reflection looked normal, the empty boards, my legs on the ladder, the flashlight trembling in my grip. Then the image shifted, just a fraction of a second out of sync with me. When I turned my wrist, the reflection followed half a beat late. A faint hum pressed against my ears, like air rushing through a narrow vent. My pulse kicked so hard it hurt. I couldn't make myself climb the rest of the way up. I reached for the blanket that had slid near the ladder, and, without looking directly at the glass again, threw it over the mirror. The hum stopped instantly. The air stilled. I waited, counting my breaths until the silence felt whole again, then climbed back down and folded the ladder shut. The house seemed to relax with me. The wood stopped creaking. The clock downstairs ticked normally again. I sat on the step halfway down the stairs, shaking, and told myself aloud, "It's just old wiring, bad acoustics, stress." Saying it didn't help much, but it was something. I made tea instead of coffee this time, less jittery, and tried to read. The words wouldn't stay on the page. My eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the way the dusk light dimmed too fast. At 8:20 p.m., the phone buzzed on the counter. Caller ID said unknown number. I answered. Hello. A pause. Then static. Beneath it, faintly, a woman's breath. Who is this? More static. Then, very clearly, roll 5. The line went dead. I stood there listening to the silence on the other end, even after it disconnected, as if she might come back. Rule 5. Never sleep in the upstairs bedroom facing north. I already wasn't planning to. But the call twisted something deeper, like the rules weren't warnings anymore. They were instructions. I left every light on that night. By 10, the woods were drowned in mist, and the fog pressed right up to the windows. The reflection of the kitchen lights hung in it like ghostly lanterns. At 10:45, the knocking started again. Not at the side door this time. At the front. Slow, steady, polite. I stood across the room and stared at the door handle. It trembled slightly, as if someone's knuckle rested against it between knocks. I didn't move. When the clock struck 11, the knocking stopped. Then, nothing for several minutes, until a new sound rose from the upstairs hallway. The faint scrape of something wooden sliding across the floor. The chair. I knew that sound. The broken one from the north bedroom. It dragged, paused, dragged again. I turned the flashlight on and aimed it up the staircase. The beam caught only dust, floating like ash in the air. The dragging stopped. A soft thump followed, like the chair being set upright again. Then, footsteps, slow, unhurried, moving toward the top of the stairs. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted out the back door, across the yard, and down the gravel drive until the house was swallowed by the mist. From the road, I looked back. The upstairs window, the north one, glowed faintly yellow, though I'd left it dark. And just before the curtain drew itself shut, I saw a figure standing there. Not distinct, just the outline of shoulders and a head tilted slightly toward me. I slept in my truck that night, parked under the old maple by the mailbox. The engine off, windows cracked, blanket pulled over me. I woke around 4 to the sound of something tapping lightly on the glass. At first I thought it was rain. Then I realized it was coming in rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. I turned slowly, expecting to see a branch. Nothing. When dawn came, I drove into town again. I didn't plan to go back that morning, but curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know if the house would look different by daylight, less menacing, maybe even ordinary. It didn't. The moment I pulled into the drive, every unease I'd felt the night before slipped right back over me, snug as a second skin. The front door was still locked, but the knob was warm to the touch, as if someone had just let go. Inside, the air smelled faintly of burnt dust and candle wax. I hadn't lit any candles. On the kitchen table lay the folded note again, the original one, the list of rules. But something had changed. A 6th rule had been added at the bottom in the same handwriting, 6. If you must leave, do not come back alone. I stared at it until my vision blurred. My hands felt cold even though the sunlight was warm on my skin. I checked every room again, top to bottom. The attic ladder was still closed. The north bedroom empty. The handprint gone. The mirror still covered. When I touched the blanket to make sure it hadn't shifted, a faint vibration hummed through the fabric. Not sound exactly, more like pressure. I yanked my hand back. That's when I heard movement behind me, not footsteps, breathing. I turned. For half a second, the attic space behind me seemed smaller, the walls closer. Then I realized it wasn't the walls, it was the mirror. The covered mirror had moved 3 feet closer to the hatch. I dropped down the ladder fast enough to bruise my shins and slammed the hatch shut. My heart wouldn't slow. I packed a duffel bag with clothes, keys, and the note, and drove until I hit the next town over. Found a cheap motel with flickering lights and a clerk who didn't ask questions. That's where I am now, writing this down. It's still the same day technically. I left just before noon. The window outside my room looks out on Route 9, where the cars pass with a steady rhythm that feels almost like safety. But every time I blink, I swear I catch a flicker of yellow light in the corner of my vision, like the north bedroom window waiting patiently for me to look back. The mirror's still covered. I made sure of that before I left. I just can't explain how, an hour after I checked in here, a folded paper appeared on the floor under my door. Same handwriting. It said Raleigh Suvan Ukavan ITMPTY. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the paper between my fingers soft from sweat. Rule 7. You can't leave it empty. The air conditioner rattled every few seconds, filling the pauses that would have been unbearable without it. The room smelled of disinfectant and cigarettes, and the carpet was the color of weak coffee. It was a place meant for one night and no memories. I turned the paper over, looking for more writing, some kind of clue. Nothing. The same faded ink, same careful spacing. Whoever had written it had known exactly how to make the words sit heavy. Empty. What couldn't I leave empty? The house. The mirror. The thought came fast enough that I almost laughed, half in disbelief, half in panic. The house wasn't just haunted. It was occupied, and whatever lived there didn't want to be alone. I read the line again. You can't leave it empty. It didn't say what would happen if I did. My phone sat on the nightstand, charging. I picked it up, typed LZ Palmer, Westfield, Vermont, into the search bar and waited for the weak motel Wi-Fi to cough up something. There were 3 results. The first was a short obituary dated 12 years ago. Elsie Mae Palmer, 84, of Westfield, passed away peacefully at home. Peacefully. Sure. The second was a small town newspaper clipping, barely a paragraph, about her husband, Harold Palmer, missing since 1999. Last seen near his property off County Road 7. Search ongoing. No update. The third result was a scanned photo, grainy and yellowed. Two people standing in front of the same house I just fled. A man in suspenders, tall, with a thick beard. Beside him, a woman whose eyes seemed too sharp for her gentle smile. Elsie. And behind them, in the upstairs window, a faint blur that might have been glare, or someone standing just out of frame. I closed the phone. The room suddenly felt too small. Outside, the afternoon had turned to a flat gray. Rain streaked the window glass, leaving trails that caught the neon sign's red reflection from the parking lot. I kept looking at that reflection, the way it shuddered with every gust. The longer I stared, the more it looked like the glow from the north window back home. At 6, there was a knock on my door. I froze. Another knock, 2 short raps. I went to the peephole. The hallway was empty. I checked the clock. 6:02 p.m. Not the witching hour. Not the middle of the night. Still, my hand hesitated on the handle. I opened it. Nobody there. But on the ground, half tucked under the doorframe, lay something wrapped in wax paper. I crouched and unrolled it. Inside was a small, framed photograph. Old black and white, the corners curled. It showed my living room. My living room. The same fireplace, same cabinet where I'd found the first note. Only this photo was decades old. The furniture different, the wallpaper faded. And in the center of the frame sat Elsie Palmer, hands folded neatly on her lap, looking straight at the camera. Behind her, in the reflection of the mantel mirror, stood a man's silhouette. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I didn't go outside again. Instead, I shoved the photograph under the pillow, turned every light on, and sat against the wall with my back to the window. I told myself to stay awake until dawn, to make it through one more night. But by midnight, exhaustion won. When I opened my eyes again, it wasn't morning. The room was dim, blue with half light, the kind that leaks in before sunrise. The lights I'd left on were dead. My phone lay on the floor, screen cracked. The air conditioner was silent, and someone was sitting in the chair by the window. I couldn't see a face, just the outline. Shoulder, head, hands folded in the lap, still as a statue. My first thought was that I was dreaming, but the smell hit me next. That same damp metal scent from the north bedroom. I blinked once. The figure was gone. I didn't move for a long minute. The silence was total. No traffic, no hum from the vent. Even my heartbeat felt muffled, like the air was padded. Then the sound came, a soft, deliberate tap, from inside the bathroom. I stood up slowly, the bed creaking under my weight, and crossed the carpet barefoot. My hand found the wall switch. When the light came on, it was dim and yellow. The bathroom door stood open just enough to show the edge of the sink. A small mirror hung above it. I hadn't noticed it before. The tapping came again, faint but distinct, from inside the mirror. I took one step back. My reflection hesitated a fraction too long before copying me. And then the words appeared, written backward across the glass, like fog handwriting forming from inside the surface of file IT. I didn't stay to see more. I grabbed my keys, phone, and duffel and bolted. The motel clerk at the front desk called something after me, but I was already in the car, engine roaring, tires scattering rainwater from the cracked asphalt. I didn't stop driving until I reached a diner 2 towns south, the first place with lights still on. I parked under the buzzing sign and sat shaking until my breath steadied. Inside, I ordered black coffee and something I wouldn't touch. A waitress with silver hair and smoker's eyes asked if I was all right. I told her I hadn't slept. When I asked if she knew Westfield, she nodded. Small place. Couple of ghost stories up that way. What kind? I asked, trying to sound casual. She leaned on the counter. There's that old house they say can't stay empty. Folks rent it, leave in a week. Always some excuse. Pipes wiring, bad dreams. Truth is, no one's supposed to live there alone. Why not? She shrugged. Every time it's empty too long, something in it starts calling people back. Neighbor's cousin swore he saw the lights on once, even after the last owner died. House don't like quiet, he said. I stared at the steam rising off my untouched coffee. The phrase hit me like a bruise. You can't leave it empty. Maybe that wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a demand. By the time I left the diner, dawn had started to wash the sky pale. For the first time in days, I almost felt calm. The road ahead stretched clean and straight, mist burning off the asphalt. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Static again, but beneath it, faintly, a voice I recognized now, my own. You can't leave it empty. The call ended. I pulled the car over and just sat there, breathing hard. The note, the photos, the voice, it all pointed back to one place. The house wasn't done with me, and deep down I wasn't done with it. By late afternoon, I found myself back on County Road 7. Gravel popping under the tires, the woods closing in like old hands. The house came into view, small and hunched against the trees, every window blind drawn tight. I parked but didn't get out right away. Told myself I'd just grab my things, maybe the deed, and then I'd find someone to sell the place to, fast. But as I stepped onto the porch, the air changed, warmer, like an exhale. The door was unlocked. Inside, the light from the windows felt dimmer than it should have been. Dust hung in the air, but it didn't move. The house was waiting. On the table lay the rules again, rewritten cleanly in fresh ink. 7 lines, the same handwriting, but now an 8th line had been added. 8. If the house stands empty, something else will fill it. The words looked wet, like the ink hadn't dried. Behind me, the floorboards creaked, soft, expectant. The sound behind me stopped as soon as I turned. The silence that followed wasn't absence, it was waiting. You can tell the difference after a few nights in that house. I kept my hand on the doorframe, ready to bolt. But leaving hadn't worked before. The rules had found me in a motel, in a mirror I'd never touched. There was nowhere else to go. The note on the table looked freshly written. I touched the edge, still damp, like ink and sweat. The 8th rule gleamed faintly in the low light. If the house stands empty, something else will fill it. I looked around. Every room was as I'd left it. The unpacked boxes stacked like dull gray tombstones, the cold fireplace, the chair at a polite angle by the window. Nothing had moved. Yet the air felt thicker, inhabited. The floor creaked once near the base of the stairs. Elsie, I said it out loud, half a test, half a plea. My voice broke in the middle. No answer. Just a faint hum in the walls, like the sound of distant traffic. But there's no highway for 20 miles. I picked up the flashlight and went room by room. Living room first clear. Kitchen next. The window latches down, the counters bare. Only when I passed the doorway into the hall did I notice it. Something faint on the wallpaper. Finger marks. Long streaks. Like someone had dragged their hand across the wall, leaving thin lines in the dust. They ran from the baseboard, all the way up to the corner by the stairs, disappearing at shoulder height. I shone the light higher. Near the ceiling, written faintly in the same brown smudge, was a single word, sty. My throat went dry. Something wanted me here. I went up the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight like it remembered me. The smell of damp metal returned, stronger than before. The north bedroom door was closed, but a dim light bled out from under the crack. I didn't remember leaving a lamp on. When I reached for the handle, it turned without resistance. Inside, the room was empty except for one thing, the mirror from the attic. Uncovered. standing upright, perfectly centered against the far wall. It shouldn't have fit through the attic hatch, but there it was. I took a single step inside. The floorboards flexed underfoot, soft and hollow. The mirror's surface shimmered faintly, not like glass, more like water. For a moment I saw my reflection, normally tired face, dirt on my shirt, flashlight beam cutting through dust. Then the image deepened. The room behind my reflection looked wrong. In the reflection, the walls were bare wood instead of wallpaper. The floor, clean, polished, no dust at all. And standing just behind the reflection of me was a woman. She wasn't clear at first, only shape and color. Gray dress, long sleeves. When she lifted her head, I saw her face. Elsie Palmer. I recognized her from the photograph. Her mouth didn't move, but her reflections did. "You came back," she said. The voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room, brushing the back of my skull like static. My voice failed. "What do you want?" Her eyes shifted past me, toward the empty walls. "It can't be empty," she said. "What can't?" "The house," she whispered. "It needs someone. It always did." The reflection wavered. Her hand lifted toward the glass, palm out. My own reflection didn't move. It stood still, head tilted slightly, as if it were listening to her instead of me. Then Elsie's hand pressed flat against the inside of the mirror. The glass rippled, tiny concentric circles spreading outward like drops on still water. My reflection blinked, but I didn't. That broke something in me. I stumbled back, knocking into the door frame. The mirror swayed once, steadied itself. "You left it alone," she said. "It calls until someone answers." "What calls?" Her smile didn't look cruel, just tired. "You'll see." Then the reflection behind her darkened, swallowed by shadow. The room in the mirror dimmed until the only light left was around her face, and she mouthed something I couldn't hear, 3 short words, before the surface went dull again. The flashlight flickered once and went out. In the dark, I could still see the faint outline of the mirror, lit from within by its own gray light. I ran. Down the stairs, through the hall, out onto the porch, heart hammering so loud I barely heard the wind rising in the trees. The sky had gone full dark, clouds low and swollen, but the house behind me wasn't still anymore. Through the windows, lights flickered room to room, like someone pacing inside, turning switches on and off. Upstairs, a shadow passed across the north window. Then another. 2 shapes now. Elsie's words hit me again. "It can't be empty." The house was filling itself. I made it halfway to the truck before stopping. Something moved in the reflection of the windshield. A shape sitting in the passenger seat. When I opened the door, the seat was empty. But the smell lingered, the same metallic dampness. I drove anyway. Gravel spit from the tires, trees flashing by in the high beams. A few miles out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For half a second, the reflection of the road behind me wasn't the road. It was the north bedroom. The headlights flared against the glass, and the image vanished. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next county line. Pulled over by a convenience store, and just sat there with the engine running, trying to remember how to breathe like a normal person. The paper with the rules sat on the passenger seat beside me, fluttering slightly from the air vent. I didn't remember bringing it. The ink looked newer now, like it had been written minutes ago. My name was scrawled at the bottom. Caretaker Evan Merrick. The air in the car turned heavy, stale. I opened the door, but the smell followed me out, the same damp metal tang. It clung to my clothes, my skin. I burned the note right there in the parking lot, using a lighter I found in the glove compartment. The paper curled in on itself, the ink bubbling black. When the last corner turned to ash, a faint sound escaped it, like a sigh or maybe relief. The smoke smelled sweet, wrongly sweet. I drove to a friend's place 2 hours away, and stayed the night on his couch. Didn't tell him anything, just said the move hadn't worked out. But even there, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That soft knock, 3 times, from inside my chest. By dawn, I knew what the note had meant. You can't leave it empty. Something else would fill it if I didn't. But maybe that something else wasn't Elsie, or her husband, or anything that ever lived. Maybe it was the house itself. Maybe it needed a heartbeat under its roof to keep it still. I left at sunrise, driving aimlessly until I realized where the road was leading me. Back toward Westfield. Toward that little gravel drive. I should have turned around, but I didn't. When I reached the ridge above the property, I pulled over and looked down. The house was quiet again. No lights, no movement. The morning mist lay over the yard like gauze, and for the first time since I'd seen it, the place looked peaceful. I should have been relieved. But that peace looked like something holding its breath. I sat there a long time, engine idling, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I told myself I'd just go down, make sure the door was locked, nothing more. Just one look. The house waited. The gravel popped beneath my tires as I rolled back down the hill. Every sound carried too far in that pale morning air. The low grind of the brakes, the tick of cooling metal when I parked. Even the quiet seemed brittle, like one wrong move could shatter it. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was the color of bone after rain, the windows blank and still. It didn't look angry, just hollow. When I reached the porch, dew soaked through my boots. The door was closed, no sign anyone had forced it. My key turned smooth in the lock. Inside smelled like wood smoke and cold iron. Nothing moved. I stood in the doorway for a long time, waiting for the house to exhale again. It didn't. The note wasn't on the table. The rules were gone. My pulse started up hard and fast. I went room to room, checking every flat surface. The counters, the mantel, the cabinet where I'd first found the paper. Nothing. Even the drawer where I'd kept it was empty, dust undisturbed. But when I reached the base of the stairs, I saw it. A faint trail of footprints. Bare, pale, wet-looking, climbing upward. 5 steps in, they vanished. "All right," I muttered, mostly to steady my voice. One last look. Upstairs, the north bedroom door was open wide. The mirror was gone. Only the faint rectangle of clean floor remained where it had stood. No dust, no marks, just emptiness. Something about that space, it drew the eye, like a missing tooth. The air in the room vibrated slightly, barely audible. A low hum that seemed to sit behind the eardrum. I realized then that the light didn't fall right. The sun through the window stretched too far into the room, catching dust that moved in lazy spirals instead of straight lines. I turned to leave. The door clicked shut behind me. My throat went dry. I turned the knob. It moved, but the door didn't open. The hum rose an octave. The window glass trembled faintly. Then, from the wall opposite me, something began to form. Not a shadow exactly, more like color thickening in air, the faint outline of a rectangle. A mirror. It wasn't glass yet, not fully. Just the shimmer of it, like heat over asphalt. The reflection within it was already clear, though. The room behind me, the door, my own figure standing too still. And something else. Behind my reflection stood a shape darker than shadow. Broad shoulders, a head bowed slightly as if waiting for me to notice. When I did, it lifted its face. It wasn't Elsie. It wasn't anyone I'd seen before. Its eyes were like the surface of old water, depthless and reflecting nothing. Its mouth didn't move, but I heard it in my head all the same, empty no longer. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my ribs. The walls bent slightly inward, wood creaking. My reflection started to move, but I didn't. It stepped closer to the mirror's edge while I stood frozen. Then it smiled. I stumbled back until my shoulders hit the door. The knob turned under my hand, still useless. The light bent wrong now, streaming from nowhere, throwing my shadow across the floor in 2 directions at once. The reflection stopped smiling. Its mouth opened. A thin crack split the center of the mirror from top to bottom, silent at first, then shrieking like metal tearing. The smell of rust flooded the air. I slammed my shoulder into the door. Once, twice. On the 3rd hit, it gave way. I spilled into the hallway, choking on air that felt thick with dust and heat. Downstairs, the house seemed alive again. Every wall groaned. The clock over the mantel ticked erratically. The sound came from all sides now. Footsteps, whispering. The faint drag of something across wood. I ran for the porch, but when I threw the door open, the world outside didn't look right. The trees were still, but the light was dimmer than it should have been for morning. The mist had returned, even though the sun was up. It filled the yard like breath on glass. Through it, the shape of the house rippled, as if there were 2 versions layered over each other. One upright, one tilted slightly, both flickering in and out of sync. I backed away until I hit the wall. The wood under my hand pulsed once, faint and warm. Then, like a switch thrown, everything stopped. No sound, no movement. Even the ticking clock froze mid-beat. For a moment, I thought it was over. That maybe I'd broken whatever held the place. Then I heard a door open upstairs, slow. Careful. I looked toward the staircase. A figure descended, one hand gliding along the banister. I thought it might be Elsie again. But when the light reached its face, I realized it was me, or close enough. Same clothes, same face, same small scar by the jaw, but the eyes wrong, flat, empty. The other me stopped halfway down the stairs and smiled faintly. "Someone has to stay," it said. My voice, my tone. "I'm not staying," I said. It tilted its head. "You already did." Then it stepped off the last stair and kept walking, past me, toward the door. I reached out on instinct, grabbed its arm. It was solid and cold, the texture of damp wood. The other me looked at my hand. "You can't leave it empty." When it stepped outside, the mist swallowed it whole. I followed, stumbling onto the porch. The yard was clear again, sunlight bright, no footprints, no fog. But when I looked back into the doorway, the house interior wasn't mine anymore. The furniture was old, different. Lace curtains, a wood stove, a calendar from 1951. And sitting in the chair by the window was Elsie Palmer, knitting quietly, humming to herself. She looked up, saw me, and smiled. "Morning, Harold," she said. The air punched out of me. I looked down at my hands. They weren't mine anymore, thicker, older. The skin lined and weathered. The floor tilted. Behind me, the sound of a car engine starting. A familiar one. I turned in time to see my truck pulling away down the drive, sunlight catching the windshield, my face behind the wheel. In Naga, they found the house 2 weeks later. After the bank sent an inspector to check on the property, the report said the front door was unlocked. Inside, the place smelled faintly of smoke and mold. The rooms were neat, dusted, the curtains drawn. Upstairs in the north bedroom stood an old mirror, covered by a folded blanket. The inspector didn't move it. He said it felt wrong to. When they checked county records, the deed was still in my name, but under a different signature. Harold Merrick. There was no record of any Evan. And on the kitchen table, a sheet of yellow legal paper sat under a glass weight. The handwriting was neat. 1. After sunset, keep all mirrors covered. 2. Do not open the door if someone knocks after 1100 p.m. 3. If you hear your name from the woods, stay inside. 4. At dawn, check the window locks. They may not stay latched. Never sleep in the upstairs bedroom facing north. 6. If you must leave, do not come back alone. 7. You can't leave it empty. 8. If the house stands empty, something else will fill it. 9. Don't forget who you are. The ink was fresh. And on the last line beneath the rules, a new name had been added. Caretaker Harold Merrick. Morning always comes slow here. The sun tries, but the trees lean in and keep most of it for themselves. The light that does slip through comes gray and soft, like it's already tired. I wake before it reaches the windows. Don't need an alarm. The house tells me when to get up. My name? Well, it's easier now to answer to Harold. The sound of it fits the air in this place. The first few days, it caught in my throat, but after a while I stopped noticing. I still remember what it used to be. Evan. The way it felt to write it. To hear someone else say it. Those memories sit like dust on a shelf. You know they're there, but they don't matter until you brush them. I keep the rules close. The paper's on the mantel under a small glass dish to keep it flat. Some mornings I read through them like prayer. Not to remind myself, but to make sure the ink stays dry. Sometimes new lines appear if I don't check. Last night one almost did. The space at the bottom of the page went faintly gray, as if letters were pressing up from underneath, not written but emerging. When I touched it, the color sank back into the paper. I left the room for a few minutes. When I returned, the surface was blank again, except for my name, which looked newly written. Caretaker. I don't know if I chose that word or if it chose me. The house is kind enough when you do what it asks. It doesn't speak now, not the way it used to. It hums instead. Low, steady, constant. A heartbeat you hear in your bones. If I open the windows too wide, the hum fades. The silence that follows is worse than any sound, so I keep them closed most of the time, except for the one in the kitchen that faces east. The latch never stays down. That's all right. The house breathes through it. I cook small meals. Sometimes there's more food than I remember buying. A loaf of bread appears on the counter, or a jar of honey with no label. The house keeps what it needs. I don't ask where things come from anymore. It rains often. The smell of wet wood seeps into everything. I used to hate that metallic tang. Now it feels like air should, weighty, familiar part of me. When the wind picks up, I hear footsteps upstairs. They don't bother me. That's Elsie, I think, or what's left of her. She hums when she walks. The same tune every time. I almost remember it. A lullaby, maybe. I've stopped covering the mirror at dawn. It doesn't try to show me things anymore. It just holds the room steady, the way water holds light. Sometimes, when I walk past, I catch a reflection that lingers half a second too long. I've learned not to pause. You don't live in this house, you live with it. It's not cruel. It's lonely. That's the part people never understand when they talk about haunted places. They think the horror is the thing that's trapped inside. It isn't. It's the emptiness waiting for someone to notice. When I first came here, I thought I was the one being haunted. I see now that I was the haunting all along. The house doesn't like change, so I keep its rhythm. Breakfast when the first light hits the wall, tea at noon, lamps lit before sunset. Never after, never during. It notices if you hesitate. Last week, at least. I think it was last week. A car stopped at the edge of the drive. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard an engine in so long that it sounded alien, like thunder in the wrong sky. A young couple stepped out, city clothes, looking up at the porch. The man held a folded map. The woman pointed toward the roofline, where the shingles have started curling. They looked so real I almost forgot to stay quiet. When she knocked, the sound went through me. 3 times. Polite. I didn't answer, of course. I remembered the rule. After a minute, the man peered through the front window. His face passed inches from mine, separated only by the thin reflection of the glass. His breath fogged a pain. For a moment, our eyes met, or they should have. But I don't think he saw me. He turned away. The woman lingered longer, hand resting on the frame. "Feels empty," she said. You can almost hear it breathing. Her words rippled the air inside. The hum deepened, pleased. When they left, the house sighed. The wood eased underfoot again. The sound of contentment. I realized then that it wasn't angry about being empty. It was just afraid. That night, a new line appeared on the paper 10. If they knock, let them think no one's home. I don't question the additions anymore. Sometimes I sit in the north bedroom and look out through the window toward the trees. The glass hums faintly against my fingers, like a pulse under skin. I see faces in the branches sometimes, quick as lightning, gone before I can name them. Maybe they're the ones who came before me. Maybe they're the ones who almost stayed. The house remembers everyone who crossed its threshold. It doesn't forget, even when we do. Last night, while I was dozing by the fire, I felt a small tremor run through the floorboards. A knock, not at the door, but from beneath. 3 sharp taps. I leaned down, pressed my palm to the wood. The vibration came again, gentle, almost shy. "Hello," I said softly. The answer rose through the boards, a whisper so thin I couldn't tell if it came from below or inside my chest. "You left it empty." The voice was mine. The old one. It faded quickly, folded back into the hum. For a while I sat there, the warmth from the fire soaking into my knees, trying to remember what being frightened felt like. I couldn't. This morning, the mirror had fogged itself over, though the air was cold. Words traced across it from the inside, Tiank, Yu. The letters lingered until I wiped them away. Underneath, for the briefest second, I saw my reflection younger again, eyes bright, jaw clean. The man who'd once walked into this house, thinking it was just a story. Then the glass went still. Now the day has begun its slow fade. The woods outside are quiet, the color of wet stone. I'll light the lamps soon. The paper on the mantel glows faintly in the firelight, its edges curling like leaves about to turn. I think it's almost time for a new caretaker. The house always knows when to start calling again. I can feel the emptiness rising through the floor, the way water pushes through a dry well. When it reaches the stairs, I'll stand at the window. Maybe I'll even open the latch this time, just a crack, so the hum can slip out and find whoever's driving past. I hope it finds someone gentle, someone who still thinks an old house can be saved. Because the worst thing you can do to a place like this isn't to fear it. It's to forget it, and the house hates being forgotten. The paper rustles behind me as I finish this. A new line is forming, letters surfacing like bubbles through paint 11. If you're reading this, it already knows your name. The ink gleams wet, the hum deepens. Somewhere beyond the trees, I think I hear a car slowing on the gravel road.